Every textbook gives the Sphinx one date, around 2500 BCE, 4500 years old, carved for a pharaoh. There's just one problem. The stone is worn in a pattern that wind and sand don't make, and that this desert, by the experts' own climate record, shouldn't have been able to make for the last 5,000 years. Something rained on the Sphinx. The question nobody at the top wants to answer out loud is when. Here's the story you were handed. The Great Sphinx was carved for the pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. One monument, one quarry, one building project, cut straight from the bedrock in a single Old Kingdom effort. It sits about 66 feet tall and 240 feet long, the height of a 6-story building, the length of nearly a full football field. That date, 2500 BCE, is on page 1 of the ancient history unit you grew up with. It's on the placard, now the part that placard leaves off. For roughly 1100 years after the Sphinx was supposedly carved, there is no written mention of it at all, not one. And even the mainstream doesn't date the Sphinx from the Sphinx. There's no inscription on it saying who made it or when. So the experts date it by the buildings around it, the temples, the causeway, the quarry, and then work backward. The timeline you were taught is more confident than the stone underneath it. Walk down into the pit the Sphinx sits in, the enclosure, and look at the walls. The rock is cut with deep grooves that run straight down, rounded, undulating, rolling profiles, like something poured over them for a very long time. That's the thing to hold on to, because wind and blown sand don't leave that. Wind leaves sharp, angular, horizontal lines. It sandblasts a rock flat and jagged. What's on those enclosure walls goes the other way, down and rounded. You don't have to take that on faith. There's a control sample. About 400 yards away sits the tomb of a man named Debehin. Same era, same plateau, same limestone. And its weathering is the sharp, jagged wind pattern, exactly what this desert should produce. 2 pieces of rock, a few minutes walk apart, wearing down in 2 completely different ways. Over its life, the Sphinx has lost about 5 feet of its own surface. So the question stops being whether it's worn, and becomes worn by what. The idea that the erosion looked wrong is old. A French scholar floated it back in the 1950s. A writer named John Anthony West put it in front of the public in 1979. And here's the part the story usually skips. The establishment's own man had already logged it. In a 1980 survey report, the mainstream Egyptologist who mapped the Sphinx wrote that its body was already severely eroded before the earliest repair stones were ever laid against it. Their own record said the wear ran deep and ran early. So West went looking for a geologist. He found Robert Schoch, a man with a PhD in geology and geophysics from Yale, Tull's teaching at Boston University. And Schoch did not go to Giza to break the timeline. He went assuming the Egyptologists were right, that this would be a quick trip to explain the erosion away and go home. June 1990. He stands in the enclosure, looks at the walls. By his own account, it took seconds. The man who flew in to close the case decided he couldn't. That's the hardest kind of witness to dismiss, the one who showed up on the other side. Which raises the next question. If that really is rain damage, when did rain like that last fall on this spot? This is where the clock comes in, and the clock isn't Schoch's opinion, it's climate science. The Sahara wasn't always sand. From roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, it was green, grassland, lakes, standing water, where there's now nothing but dune. Then the door shut. Sustained dry conditions set in around 5,500 years ago, and the region has been arid ever since. Line that up. The last era that could soak this rock with heavy, sustained rain ended before the Pharaohs' official date, not after it. So Schoch's reading is simple. If the body carries rain erosion, the body was cut while it could still rain, which puts it, at a minimum, somewhere between 7,000 and 5,000 BCE. He's pushed that back as far as 9,700 BCE. Take the low end, that's still older than the textbook by 2,500 years. Take the far end, and you're looking at a monument older than farming, older than writing itself. But hold on, that's still a man reading a shape. Is there anything harder than an interpretation? There is. In April 1991, Schoch went back, this time with a geophysicist named Thomas de Becky. They didn't want to argue about the surface anymore. They wanted to look underneath it. Sledgehammer, steel plate, instruments laid across the enclosure floor, sending sound waves down into the bedrock, and reading how deep the weathering went, listening to the ground beneath the Sphinx. And the ground gave them something the surface couldn't. The rock was weathered about 6 to 8 feet deep along the front and the sides, but only about half that at the back. Think about what that means. The floor around 3 sides of this thing has been soaking up weather for roughly twice as long as the fourth. That's not a shape you can wave off as bad limestone. That's a measured depth. They took it to the Geological Society of America in the fall of 1991. Around 70 geologists asked to be kept informed. They published it, peer-reviewed, in the journal Geoarchaeology in 1992. And in 1993, it went national. An NBC special, narrated by Charlton Heston, reached an estimated 33 million people and won an Emmy the next year. Keep that broadcast in mind, because it got one thing about Schoch's own data backwards, and we'll come back to it. First, how does the establishment answer a peer-reviewed paper? Not with a new survey, with a label. In 1994, the 2 biggest names in Egyptology, Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner, co-authored the takedown in Archaeology magazine, and Lehner's line tells you everything about the posture. You don't overthrow Egyptian history, he said, on one phenomenon like a weathering profile. That is how pseudoscience is done, not real science. Sit with that. A Yale-trained geologist brings a peer-reviewed depth measurement, and the answer from the top isn't a counter-survey, it's the word pseudoscience. The gate closes, the file gets stamped fringe, and the conversation is supposed to end there. And it's not a one-time reflex. Jump to March 2025. A separate team makes a radar claim about structures under the Giza Plateau, and Hawass is back in the press calling it fake news, saying they used methods that aren't approved or validated. Now, to be straight with you, that 2025 radar claim is unproven, and it isn't our evidence here, but the pattern is the point. Something doesn't fit the timeline, and the first move from the old guard is to reach for a label. So let's do the thing they won't. Let's put the strongest case for the other side right on the table. Because it's real, and you should weigh it yourself. 1. The Sphinx is carved from soft, flaky limestone that sheds pieces on any windy day. Fast natural wear, no ancient rain required. 2. 2023. A lab at NYU took layered clay and ran fast-flowing water over it, and a sphinx-like shape, a head, a raised neck, paws out front, emerged on its own in hours, and the real Sphinx faces straight into the prevailing wind, exactly what that natural process predicts. 3. The quarry and the temples tie together. Blocks cut from the enclosure went into the temple right beside it, which reads as one Old Kingdom project. And 4. The green Sahara cuts both ways. The same wet age that could rain on the Sphinx would also flood the Nile. And those floods could have wrecked a statue sitting there thousands of years early. That's a serious case. And here's what keeps the other side alive anyway. The vertical rounded fissures are still there. The front-to-back depth split is still measured. And Schoch isn't alone. But 2 more geologists, Colin Reeder and David Coxill, each looked independently, and each concluded the Sphinx is older than the pyramids. Reeder lands conservatively. A few centuries, not thousands. But that's still a crack in a wall that's supposed to be solid. And one more thing about the man at the center. Remember that famous 1993 broadcast? Schoch himself points out it drew his seismic data wrong, made the weathering look like it deepened gradually, when his real data shows it stepping shallower only at the back. He corrected his own hit documentary. That's a man arguing with his own publicity, not a showman protecting a story. So where does that leave the promise we started with? Water damage that shouldn't exist. Here's the honest version. And it's stronger than a slogan. The erosion is real, rounded, vertical, cut by water, confirmed by all sides that the rock is deeply worn. The rain window is real, and it closed before the Pharaoh was ever born. A Yale geologist read it as older. 2 more geologists read it as older, A seismic survey measured a depth split that fits older, and the answer from the top was a word, pseudoscience, not a better test. And now the part that should stay with you. There is no carbon date on the Sphinx. Not for Schoch, not for the establishment, not for anyone. The stone holds nothing to carbon date, no charcoal, no bone, and it carries no inscription. So the official 2500 BCE, the number on the placard, is not read off the Sphinx. It's read off the buildings next door. That's the whole fight in one sentence. A monument the experts date by its neighbours, wearing damage the textbook can't cleanly explain, in a desert that stopped raining before the date they gave it. The placard still says 2500 BCE. The rock still says something the placard won't. And if the body really was cut while it could still rain here, then the question quietly changes. It stops being how old the Sphinx is, and starts being who was standing on this plateau, with the skill to carve it, thousands of years before the pharaoh they gave the credit to. And why? To this day, no one has been allowed to date what lies beneath its pores.